Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I haven't had the chance to meet many of you. My name is Zinat Rahman, and I'm the new Executive Director of the Institute of Politics. I am joining this community after having spent the last 10 years in DC, where I worked at the Aspen Institute, the Department of State, and the U.S. Agency for International Development. But it all started for me here in Chicago, where I was a founding staff member of the Interfaith Youth Corps, and I was previously a fellow at the Institute of Politics. IOP staff and I are really looking forward to welcome you in person at the house in the coming weeks. And today we're here to officially welcome our Fall 2021 Pritzker Fellows to the IOP community. To formally introduce our fellows is Jackie Rosa. Jackie is from Palmyra, Wisconsin, and she's a fourth year in the college. And this year she's going to serve as the co-chair of the IOP Student Advisory Board. Before Jackie joins us, just a couple of housekeeping notes. First, we can't see or hear you. Second, in about 40 minutes, we'll take questions from you. So look for instructions in the Zoom chat on how to send us your questions. Third, this upcoming Saturday, the Student Advisory Board is hosting a barbecue at the IOP house, which is 5707 South Woodlawn, and you're all welcome. We've missed seeing you, and we'd love to meet those of you who are new to campus, and we promise that there's going to be good food. Lastly, sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on all things IOP, which includes paid internships, events, fellow seminars, voter registration, pretty much everything. The link is in the chat right now. So with that, welcome again, and I'd like to turn the Zoom screen over to Jackie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first Meet the Fellows event of the 2021-2022 school year. I would like to give a warm welcome to our Fall Quarter Pritzker Fellows, who include Catherine Bertini, Ertharin Cousin, Tony Fabrizio, Janice Jackson, Mitch Landrieu, Russell Moore, and Latvala Najib Audu. Our fellows will be leading in-person, off-the-record, student-only seminars throughout the quarter. As this is one of the IOP's first events of the quarter, I would like to bring attention to other events this quarter and the many ways to get involved with the IOP. As mentioned earlier, this week, the Student Advisory Board will be tabling on the front lawn of the IOP on September 23rd from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and will be also hosting the barbecue on September 25th from 12 to 2 p.m. All students from the Chicago community are invited to come. Other avenues to get involved with the IOP include career advising and internships, civic engagement, event ambassadors, and the Fellows Program. Civic engagement hosts a variety of programs you can join, including the Bridge Writing Workshop, Spectrum, Tech Team, The Gate, W+, Bridging the Divide, Legacy Initiatives, and Leaders of Color, which I was a member of my first year. The Fellows Program is another great opportunity for students to get involved with the IOP and make lasting connections with professionals in their fields of interest. Each quarter, the program brings in new fellows that cover a breadth of topics and professions that allow students to learn more about their own interests or engage in conversations with different perspectives. Students can participate in the program through attending fellow seminars and office hours and can get even more involved by applying to be a fellows ambassador or a fellows team lead. I have been both an ambassador and a team lead, and I also served as a fellows intern last year. My time with the Fellows Program has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my time at UChicago. Getting to develop meaningful connections with experts and prominent individuals in their respective fields is an incredibly rare opportunity that I have found many benefits from, such as for career advancement and learning about topics I'm passionate about or topics I would like to learn more about. These fellows are truly here for the students. We learn from them, but they also learn a lot from us. So ask a lot of questions and engage a lot in their seminars and office hours. And now I'd like to turn it over to a man who needs no introduction, IOP Director David Axelrod, who will help us learn more about this exciting group of fellows. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all around the IOP house this quarter. Enjoy the event.
Jackie, thank you so much. Let me, here I am. Thank you so much, and we're so excited about your leadership. And Zinat, welcome. What a wonderful addition to the IOP. And I'm just thrilled about this fellows class. It's so diverse and in terms of experience and perspective. You know, we're just so lucky to have you all. I'm going to ask you each to say a few words about yourself, but I also want to ask specific questions. I probably have time for about one of each of you, and I'm treating the Ertharin and Catherine combo together. You can divide your time up any way you want. But Latvala, let me start with you. First of all, happy to see you safe. Looking forward to your arrival in Chicago. Say a word about yourself, and then I want to follow up with a specific question.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the opportunity and for the invite. I'm very happy to be part of this amazing group, and very much looking forward to spending a few weeks in Chicago. I'm a journalist. I'm from Afghanistan. I'm the director of Tolo News. It's a national TV channel in Afghanistan. I've been at the job for over a decade now. I've been a journalist for about 15 years, based in Kabul mostly. And things have changed a little bit. I'm sure we might have an opportunity to discuss that. But it's a different world for most of us after 15th of August.
Latfula, we've heard a lot. First of all, has anything surprised you in this new rendition of the Taliban? Has anything surprised you in these initial weeks of their taking power?
I think their military advances was a surprise. Collapse of the Afghan institution, particularly the army and police. We had a force of 350,000. Collapse of that force in just about around 100 days was a big surprise. And lack of leadership of the previous government, particularly Ashraf Ghani, was certainly contributed to the situation. After August 15, I think what the Taliban is demonstrating right now is certainly an image which is not very different to what it was in 96 to 2001. Whether it's about press freedom, women's rights, girls' education, and democratic values. The country has changed, the society has changed, but the rulers apparently are not. So the country is going through a lot right now. I think I'm very disappointed and very saddened as an Afghan and as a journalist at what happened in Afghanistan. And somehow it's related also to the US because we were together in this for the past 2 decades. Not just the amount of time, but also the investment in the sacrifices in blood and treasure. So I think there is a lot for all of us, to reflect, to think, to see and analyze what went wrong, and also discuss the future. Afghanistan has been a country for the past 5,000 years. It's going to have a future. So how can we impact that future, shape that future? It's one of the youngest countries in the world in terms of the population. I think 2/3 of Afghans are under 25. So a lot of lives and dreams and future is at stake.
Yeah, we look forward to exploring all those issues with you here, and also learning about how one sets up a news service from outside the country's borders to continue to report on it. Ertharin and Catherine, you share a mission and a history. So why don't you introduce yourselves and then let me follow up.
Oh, for you, Catherine.
Sure, thanks. Well, we're going to have fun. Ertharin and I are going to have fun this term, sharing this topic, politics of hunger. And we both have some similar parts of our background, including most prominently having run the World Food Program. But we come from different directions to this point. But you'll find that when we say politics of hunger, although we're from different parties, we're not going to be talking about the Democratic approach versus the Republican approach. We're really talking about the politics that impacts poverty, that impacts war, that impacts civil strife, that impacts women and girls, and they're not having the right kind of opportunities in order to do what they can do to and poverty and hunger. So it's a much broader perspective. It's going to be national and international, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be fun.
Well, I'm Ertharin Cousin. I was the U.S. Ambassador for Food and Agriculture, as well as the Executive Director of the World Food Program, and really honored to teach with Catherine, who's been a girlfriend for a very long time. As she said, we come from different sides of the political spectrum, but what we share is a commitment to access to nutritious food for all, regardless of geography, race, color, or creed. And what we know is that politics is a factor that keeps people hungry in America, as well as different places across the world. This week is a UN Food System Summit, and politics is limiting how effective that summit is actually going to be. But what is going to make it a success is that national governments around the world are making commitments to new pathways forward to supporting political action. But at the same time, you have the NGO community saying there's no place for private sector. So we're going to bring all of these different perspectives into a conversation over our time together at the university, in hopes of engaging students in what role can they have and thinking about what is necessary, but hopefully as they develop their careers and being a part of the solutions for ensuring that no one goes hungry in the world.
Let me just ask you guys this. How you've been at this for decades. Where are we today relative to where we were when you began this work? Because we've seen climate change, we've seen mass migrations, we've seen COVID. Are we better or worse off than when you started this work?
Well, the good news is, if there is good news, that if you look at projections of population or even actual population growth from the 50s until now, for instance, and compare it against the growth of people who are desperately hungry around the world, it's actually good news, because the growth of hunger has not anywhere near kept up with the growth of the population. In fact, it's decreased since like Eisenhower time. However, right now, as you point out, there's big problems, including COVID, including more displaced people than since World War II, including climate change and the impact that has. So there's a lot of new challenges that have to be dealt with. And in the last couple of years, the numbers have gone up, but the trend lines still have been positive. And that's why there's been a fair amount of, that's not why, let me switch the other way around. There's been a fair amount of growth into middle income in many countries. And that's why then there's been a decrease in hunger.
Well, I'll just add on to everything that Catherine said, and that the face of hunger is different than it was when we started this in lots of ways. You don't have the kind of famines where millions of people are dying because of lack of hunger. We had the Green Revolution, and we'll talk about that and how that has evolved and what that means in countries that were affected by the Green Revolution, and the reduction in famine as a almost natural occurrence in many countries around the globe. But what you have now are 3 billion people who can't afford a healthy meal on a regular basis. You have 2.5 billion people who are eating every day, but eating foods that are non-nutritious because of lack of access to the incomes. And so you have an obesity and overweight problem. You have 150 million children who are chronically malnourished. And what effect does that then have on economic development in those countries? And the last thing I'll say is, what we see in middle income countries now is what we call the double burden of malnutrition, where you have a large portion of the population that, because of inadequate diets, are chronically malnourished, but then you have a growing portion of the population that's suffering from non-communicable diseases as a result of overnutrition and overweight challenges that are directly related to diet and access to healthy foods. And so we'll discuss all of those issues and how geographic locations, indigenous populations, and our urban poor in the United States are directly affected by all of these issues that are different from when we started, but many would argue that the impacts are even more challenging today. And David, the last comment, you raised a question of climate. The agriculture system that we have today is the most efficient that it's ever been. It contributes 30% of the greenhouse gases to the climate crisis that we're facing today. Yet the conversations that we're having around how we finance the tools that are necessary to address the climate challenge talk about transportation and energy, not food. There's a reason for that. And so how do we develop the conversation that the food system that is necessary to transform this food system in support of our climate, as well as in support of health of population and adequate incomes, is a big part of the conversation as well.
I'm tempted to say that's a lot to chew on, just as a, but we move, let us move on. Russell Moore, we've watched the evangelical movement become a very powerful political force over the last 40 years. Talk about what the challenges are of that and the potential dangers of getting too entangled with a candidate, a party.
Well, one can see the Pew study from just this past week of people who are identifying themselves as evangelicals, even though they may not go to church anywhere, because they're Trump supporters. And they assume that means that I must be an evangelical. At the same time that you have numbers of evangelicals, younger people, minorities who are leaving, who don't want to have that name because it's become a political word. And so what I plan to talk about is the fact that anybody working in government and politics needs to be able to understand evangelical religion, even if they're not counting on those votes. You can see that right now with COVID and the sort of work that has to be done to reach evangelicals in communities about public health. I think a similar dynamic is going to be at work with climate change. And some other questions going forward. So I think what many of us thought might be a generational change in evangelicalism is being fought quite a bit. And it's contested as to what evangelical Christianity is even going to be and whether or not it's going to be an outpost of one political party or one candidate or something else.
I robbed you of your introduction. So we're doing this backwards here, but just say a word about yourself.
I'm Russell Moore. I'm a theologian at Christianity Today, which is a thought leadership journal founded by Billy Graham in the 1950s. And previously, I was president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which is the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the nation's largest Protestant denomination, largest evangelical denomination. So I've been in the room with a lot of what's going on in terms of the religious right, and also in the room to see the fracturing that has happened as a result of that, not only with the political aspects, but also racial justice questions and sexual abuse questions and issues that are going to be really right at the fabric of American life.
Thank you. Janice Jackson, you're a familiar figure to those of us in Chicago. Say a word about yourself, and then I want to ask a specific question.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here. Janice Jackson, a lifelong Chicagoan. Until recently, I led the third largest school district in the country, Chicago Public Schools, which has about 340,000 students. In my session, I plan to talk specifically about some of the challenges that we face here in Chicago pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, but to also zoom out and look at public education as it's situated in this country, and what the future should look like and what can we learn from the lessons in the past that will take us forward. So I'm super excited about engaging with the students here, and also I hope I get an opportunity to come to some of the other sessions that have been mentioned, because I'm super excited. I can only imagine how the students feel about the offerings.
Thank you. I want to ask you about an issue that is front and center every day, but more in some communities than others, which is the issue of violence. And what is the challenge for you as an educator, for the system, of the trauma that these young people experience on a regular basis, and how does that interrupt the mission of education?
Well, it definitely is a part of everything that we do. You know, I've often said we were, in my opinion, in the middle of a pandemic prior to COVID. I grew up in Chicago my entire life. And so this pandemic of violence that has become normalized, unfortunately, in many of the communities in the city, just like the community that I grew up in, definitely impacts what happens in the classroom and what happens in our schools. And so that has always been the case. I think for most of the students that we serve in Chicago public schools and districts like that across the country, they're dealing with the disproportionate impact COVID has had on those communities, coupled with some of these problems that, you know, to some seem intractable, you know, prior to that. And so unpacking that, overcoming that is a huge feat, and something that anyone who signs up to work in public education understands is mission critical. I will say what's interesting about everything that's being discussed today in the common through line is education. When you look at these disparate outcomes, at the core, it is about either access to an education or access to information that will help you make better decisions, whether we're talking about food insecurity, and some of the other, you know, misinformation. So all of the things that we're going to be covering in this group. And so to answer one of the questions that was already in the chat, I think looking at public education and, more importantly, wealth distribution in this country are probably, in my opinion, the two most important things that young people could be trying to lift up solutions for, because the issues are, you know, they're not getting better. Chicago's history around violence is clear. It's been talked about. It's palpable if you live in this space and you're trying to solve the problem. And so really providing our kids with more opportunities so that they, you know, have an outlet is something that I've dedicated my life to and look forward to continuing to do as long as I'm on this earth.
Yeah, well, we're grateful for that. Thanks, Janice. Mayor Landrieu, some of us have known you for a very long time, even when you were a precocious young legislator. But a lot of the world got to know you better when you ordered the removal of a Confederate statue in the city of New Orleans. What did you learn about your community through that episode? What did you learn about the South? What did you learn about our country? And how did it spur you on to what you're doing? And before I almost made the same mistake twice. Say a couple of words about yourself before you answer my three-part question.
Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be with all these brilliant people. I've been listening with rapt attention, especially to the issue of food. I've just spent the last 2 weeks. We're in the city of New Orleans. As you know, Ida hit. Communities down here got devastated. I've been working with Jose Andres and his team with World Central Kitchen, trying to get food to people. And last year when the COVID piece hit, we worked a lot on that. And just to say this, food is a national security issue. It ought to be a top priority in the country and in the world, and nobody should go hungry. It just is that's a moral failure of ours if we can't fix that problem. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of you about that. And Janice, on violence, when I was the mayor of the city of New Orleans, we actually have a higher rate of violence than Chicago does. And I know that Arnie Duncan and his team and the mayor and her team are working on violence with Chicago Cred and a lot of other things. But here in New Orleans, we had something called NOLA for Life and worked on the issue of protecting people every day. And that is another critical issue. Both food and violence can be solved. They're solvable problems. They're hard, but they're fixable. And in that regard, they're political. And essentially, I'm a politician. I graduated from Catholic University of America, went to Loyola Law School, was primarily educated by the Jesuits, which should explain a lot about how I think about things. But I'm married and have 5 kids. All of my kids have gone through school. I still have a senior at Arizona State University, which forms the way I think about college students. So I can't wait to meet all of you guys in person and listen to what it is that you're thinking about in your future. But as a younger person, I served 16 years in the Louisiana State Legislature in the Deep South, and that's where I was born and raised. That's where my family was born and raised. I became lieutenant governor and was lieutenant governor when Katrina hit. I sat in the second chair of command during that response. And then some years later became mayor of the city of New Orleans and helped rebuild the city from 2010 to 2018, which was in and of itself prescient, given the fact that the country's trying to rebuild the country by investing in infrastructure. We actually lived through that experience. Russell, when you spoke a little bit earlier about faith and evangelicals, that applies to evangelicals and the Southern Baptists, but applies to the Catholics as well. And there's nothing that I have done in politics, David, in the last 30 years that hasn't had ideology involved in it, race involved in it, faith involved in it, and then a civic sense of who we are and what we're supposed to be. So, Arnie, when you asked me, David, when you asked me the question about the 4 Confederate monuments that we took down, what shocked me and then what made me feel sad was how hard it was to do something that should have been so simple and was so long overdue, and how that became political at all, much like voting and other things. And I have a great love for this country. I have a great and undying faith that we're going to be okay. But we have made it much, much harder on ourselves than it should be to solve problems that are so obviously fixable. But we just can't seem to figure out a way to work together. And so that troubled me the most about how long it took to take the monuments down, especially after the killings in Mother Emanuel Church by Dylan Roof. That there's certain things that happen in history that ought to spur you into, you got to be kidding me, we can't keep doing this. And that should have been one of the moments. And it should not have taken us 5 years to take down all the Confederate monuments that we've taken down to date, with just one happening a couple of weeks ago with Mayor Stoney and his team. So I say, and I'm in my office and I have a picture of John Lewis sitting on my desk, who, grabbed my face and, when I asked him, have we made progress, and said, you make me feel bad when you even ask me that question. Clearly we have. But he also said to me, we have a long way to go. And the issue of race for me is one that continues to haunt me, because we seem to not understand that unless and until we get to go through that, and by through it, I don't mean around it or over it or under, I mean through it, and go through the pain and agony of acknowledging, recognizing where we have been, what we have done, the imperfections of this country, while recognizing the good things that we've done. Unless and until we can get to the other side of it, we will continue to have battles that seem to be unending and unfortunate. And essentially what it means is that we have to start treating each and every one of our fellow citizens as fully human and fully valuable. And when we learn how to do that, that is the thing that intersects across education, food, religion, faith. And in my last couple of years, I've been exploring that issue with my organization that's called E Pluribus Unum. Out of many, we are one, to try to figure out a way, through having personal conversations with thousands of people, how they process this information and how they intend to get to the other side of it. And I'll just end with this. I don't think America will ever be fully herself, or ever be as great as she could become, unless and until we fix that particular problem. There are lots of other ones, but that one is the one, from my perspective, that seems to make us unable to really fully solve the other more complicated problems that we have, because it threatens the very democracy itself. And so, besides talking about in the seminar how to rebuild cities and how to respond to emergencies and how to get food to people, or how to deal with climate change or violence, we'll also be trying to speak to and speak through the issue of race and what our relationship is to it, what our responsibility is to try to heal our country and move us in the right direction.
Thank you, Mayor. Tony Fabrizio, you are a legendary figure in polling. Say a few words about yourself, and then let me follow up with a question of you.
Sure. Thank you, David. Thank you, IOP, for inviting me to join this illustrious group, and in listening to all of you and the topics that you're going to cover. It makes me wonder why I'm here. I am a Republican pollster. I have done polling for Republican candidates and causes and groups for nearly 40 years, all throughout the country. I've been the chief pollster on 5 Republican presidential campaigns, 3 of which were the nominee, the most recent being President Trump in 2016 as his chief pollster and his reelect in 2020, his reelection campaign. I've worked for scores of US senators, congressmen, governors at every level of government. And on numerous countries around the world for prime ministers and presidents. The topics I am going to tackle in my seminars are the current state of the Republican Party in the United States and how the evolution over the last 20 plus years, how it's gotten to where it is, what the focus of the Republican Party is, the problem with polling, public polling, political polling in today's political marketplace, and what we see on a daily basis. And lastly, what the outlook for the 2022 elections are and what that potentially means going forward into 2024. So that's kind of the topics I'll be covering, David.
So being an old political hack myself, I have to follow up on that last point and ask, it seems to me that there's a dilemma for the Republican Party right now, which is they can't live without Trump, and they may not be able to live with Trump, in that you can't get nominated in the Republican Party. It's very, very hard without his support, because he is, as we saw recently in the CNN poll, he's still by far and away the person most Republicans identify as the leader of the Republican Party, but he's not popular broadly, and he's controversial, obviously, broadly. And so you have the dilemma of people being nominated who satisfy, Republican electorate, but may not travel well beyond it. How do Republicans navigate that?
Well, what you say is true. It's very difficult in today's modern Republican Party in primaries that are going to occur, and numerous ones. In fact, there's far more coverage of Republican primaries these days than there are of Democrat primaries because of the Trump dynamic and the role it plays in those primaries. But I think one of the things that we've seen occur and continues to occur is that the continued polarization of the parties away from each other continues to shrink the number of voters that are actually persuadable, if you will. I don't want to call them in the middle because that may not be their ideology, but the number of voters that are truly persuadable continues to shrink. And what we've seen occur, at least over the last 20 plus years, is we've seen a series of elections where voters whipsaw between parties. So you go from 2006 to 2008 to 2010 to 2012 to 2014 to 2016 to 2018, where voters just seem to flip back and forth. And the flipping back and forth, while the presidential numbers kind of mask it because of the huge margins racked up in states like California and New York, when you get to a number of other states based on electoral votes or even in congressional races, the number of votes that shift are not significant, that change the control of Congress or even the presidency. And so what I think will happen in 22 is, whether you like them or whether you dislike them, there is currently a contrast that's out there right now between the former president and the current president. And what we're seeing in public polling and what we're seeing in specific districts and targeted districts is that the current president's numbers, particularly with independents, who are by and far the lion's share of those persuadable voters, have dropped such that it is making the Republicans not only an attractive, but a very viable alternative to their Democrat challengers. And it's a number of factors. And it was wrong, I think, for the Democrats to misread the election of Biden as a rejection, as an endorsement of all of their policies. Just like it's wrong for the Republicans to assume that, it just a little bit different would have changed everything for their part, for our party and for the presidency. So I think there's misreading that goes into this, but I do think that the national political environment, particularly in the congressional elections, will go a long way to nudging a number of these races one way or the other. And right now it looks like it favors the Republicans.
We're going to get to questions from the audience in a few minutes. I have to say, listening to all of you, I feel like I'd love to be locked in a room with all of you for an evening. And I'd like to hear your questions of each other, because there is so much cross-pollination in these discussions that go to the issues from food security to faith to politics to everything, education, everything we're talking about here. Each of you have something to say, and probably each of you have questions of your own to ask of each other, and we hope to promote those kind of conversations throughout this quarter. We don't want you guys just painting in your lanes, because you have so much wisdom to bring and so much insight to bring beyond them. Laftella, before we go to question, I mentioned this earlier. Explain how you and your colleagues are going to cover Afghanistan without the ability to be there, or those who are there without the ability to have free access. Tell me how you envision the road forward.
David, we still have a very large newsroom in Kabul and also in the provinces, at least in the key provinces. We have so many journalists who go out every day and do stories. So we produce 18 hours of content every single day from Afghanistan right now as we speak. When Ghani fled the country on the 15th of August, institutions crumbled. We decided to remain on air because we knew that if we shut down, it would have been very difficult for us to resume broadcasting. And it might have needed renegotiation with the Taliban. So we thought it was important for us to stay on air. Some people who had to leave, or like me, were traveling already and are stuck outside. I think some of them have been replaced in Kabul. But the rest are trying to work online. Journalists, I think the issue is that all of a sudden we have a different set of stories to cover. I mean, the Taliban's approach towards so many of the pressing issues that I mentioned earlier. How are they going to clean? We have a mayor on the group, a city of 5 million people in Kabul. How do we expect a militant group, to run such a city as to start? How to deal with an industry of media where 10,000 journalists are in the country right now, which didn't exist 20 years ago when the Taliban were last time around. So I think for now we're trying to survive, trying to continue our operation in Afghanistan, but at the same time test the water to see how far we can go. I think access to information is becoming difficult. I think challenging certain issues, objective reporting is becoming more difficult, if not impossible. I think the list of taboos, the topics to discuss, is becoming larger. Music has vanished from the Afghan TV channels on the entertainment side. A lot of programming has already been altered and modified in a way to accommodate the current political reality. So the future is uncertain for the Afghan media, as well as for the entire country and the younger generation. But I think it's important to keep it going for now, to see where the new equilibrium is going to be.
As you speak, and one of the things that I hope that people take away from your sessions here is the value of independent journalism, the importance of independent journalism, which we take for granted too often in our country. But the ability to shine a bright light in dark corners and tell people what's going on inside their own country, inside the government, is essential. It's certainly essential to a working democracy. The challenge now is how does it adapt itself to the new reality in Afghanistan? But we have a lot to learn from you, and admire the courage of your colleagues, you and your colleagues, in your determination to carry on. We've got a question from Ali, the class of 2024. There you are.
Thanks, David. And, thanks everyone for being here. So I'm Ali Said. I'm a second year public policy student in the college. And it's great to be back at the IOP and look forward to seeing you all in person, in a few weeks. So this fall, our fellows include experts on hunger, a pollster, a former lieutenant governor, and many more leaders with very diverse ranges of experience. So my question for all of you is, what is one issue that you feel next generation leaders must tackle in order to work towards a successful future? So that could be hunger or climate change or immigration or something else. I'd just love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Ali, David, this is Catherine. I think it's not any one of those issues. I think it's inclusivity. I think unless we listen to each other, unless we respect each other's views, no matter where they come from, no matter, it doesn't matter, issues of race and culture or financial ability or region or anything else, we so distrust each other now. We have to get over that, and we have to be inclusive in whether we're dealing with climate issues or gender issues or hunger issues or anything else, and be sure that we have really everybody at the table. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to drive real change that lasts.
I saw you nodding your head there, Russell.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And part of that has to do, we're not going to be able to address any of these issues if we have the sort of country that's having a nervous breakdown and fraying at each other all the time. And what I'm seeing is that the very sort of toxicity that we see in the political climate is reproducing itself in churches, in school board meetings, in people's dinner tables, in their families, where family members aren't speaking to each other anymore. And so I think without addressing that, we're not going to be able to go forward with the other things.
David, I think it's beyond that. I think it's respect for institutions. It doesn't matter what side of the political divide you're on. You are distrustful of the media. You are largely distrustful of government. You are largely distrustful of institutions that 50 years ago, we didn't distrust. One of the questions I asked in one of my surveys of Republican voters who are the most distrustful of the media is we need to go back to the days where we had newscasters like Walter Cronkite. Now, Walter Cronkite was not considered to be in his day, a middle of the road reporter. But the nostalgia for the types of reporting that a Walter Cronkite did is extremely popular in today's news media. And with the advent of social media making it so easy for so many people to have opinions and broadcast opinions, and everybody is undermining everybody else's opinion. It doesn't matter if we have no respect, COVID vaccines, or whether or not to wear masks, or any of these other things. Since people don't respect basic institutions, it makes it very difficult to have civil conversation. It makes it very difficult to have meeting of the minds on issues because there's no equilibrium where people go to and say, okay, that makes sense and that's what I believe. Well, that's what I'll trust.
Mitch, what do you think about that?
I think all of the above. I think those are all good statements. I wonder a lot about, I'm a passionate person. I have strong feelings about, what I think about certain things. But what bothers me the most, I think, is we've gotten ourselves in a position in the United States where, because we don't know how to talk to each other, because we don't include each other, we can't fix simple problems. We can't, I'm sorry, I said that the wrong way. We can't fix even simple problems. And we have massive problems that we have to fix. So I wonder a lot about how we got here. I remember, and the students won't remember this because you weren't around, but in 1999, right around New Year's, all we were worried about was Y2K. And it was kind of a reference to the fact that the computers were going to move into a new millennium and everybody was going to get screwed up. We weren't going to be able to talk to each other. But at that time, and Catherine and Ertharin, y'all talked about this a little bit when you were talking about food security. Are we better off today than we were back then? In 1999, on December 31st, the United States of America was far and above in a greater position to lap the world in every way. There was nobody even close to being able to compete with us, not Russia, not China. And in a few years, 21 years, which is a nanosecond in the scope of history, we find ourselves actually in a weakened position and not being able to organize ourselves so that we can be okay. And I think we really have to do a gut check and think about what were the mistakes that we made, why we made them, how we got at each other's throats, why we're unable to even come to a simple solution on things that should not be as complicated as they are. To me, that's a big, big, big question that I'm not sure we're willing to answer, because I don't think that we are willing to look at it as hard as we need to, without judgment, but with a clear determination to get to an answer. Because if you can't fix stuff, irrespective of what the issue is, you got a real problem. And by the way, when you have China sitting out there, and these other countries, by the way, which is, you said, in Afghanistan, which is 5,000 years old, that are long older than us, have deeper cultures, different histories. You have China, you have Russia, you have India. They're all bigger than us, and they're actually catching up and maybe getting past us. I wonder what the United States thinks that we're going to do, and what the next 10 to 15 years looks like, and whether or not we're willing to actually do the deep dive that we need to get ourselves in the position that we should have been in had we gotten it right the first time.
I think that how we got there is something that we're going to want to probe this year.
Yeah.
Because, I think it turns out that there is profit in railing against institutions. There's profit in division, and political profit, financial profit, and that's a discussion we need to have. Olivia Gross, where are you? Thanks, Ali. Olivia, there you are.
Sorry, some technical difficulties. Hi, David. Great to see you, and so excited to be with everyone. My name is Olivia Gross, and I'm a second-year fundamentals student in the college who will be in Hyde Park this coming year. So on the topic of polarization, like Catherine mentioned, when reflecting on the topics that have been discussed, such as hunger and violence, by nature as a student, when I think about these topics, many would argue they should not be polarizing issues. And so I'm curious to hear if you think these issues can be in the category of those that bring people together rather than divide us and drive us apart. And if so, what, in your opinions, would this look like? Thank you.
Ertharin?
Yeah, I'll just say that the issues as a topic, you're absolutely right, should bring us together. The challenge is the solutions. And as we talk about solutions, that's what divides us apart. When we think about charity and the humanitarian issues, those conversations tend to bring us together. But when we talk about building the right to food and resiliency in populations and investing in a social safety net that will give people dignity, it begins to pull us apart for all of the reasons that were just talked about in response to that last question, because of lack of inclusivity, lack of civic responsibility that we feel for each other and for the public good and for moving forward people who don't necessarily look like us or live with us. And so those are the kind of challenges that we have, is that it's not enough that we come together in thinking an issue is wrong, but we must also work towards shared ideas on the solutions that will move people forward despite the political divide.
Thanks, Ertharin. We have a question from Natalie, and I don't know if she's on the phone or on camera, but she should be with us. Natalie, are you here? Thanks, Olivia.
Yes, I am, and I have a background on apologies. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm for both today and this quarter. I'm very excited. My name is Natalie Ayers. I'm a second-year master's student in computational analysis and public policy at the School of Public Policy here, and I'll be in Hyde Park for the quarter as well. I was hoping to actually follow up on the question of the media in Afghanistan, wondering kind of, Afula, whether you or any others in the journalism community around you, if there are compromises you'd be willing to make to kind of keep some voice under Taliban rule, and if so, what those would be, or whether that's not an option and there are other methods you're going to be pursuing, if it comes to that.
Well, thank you, Natalie. I think compromises sometimes is not the solution. It might be a temporary tactic to, especially when it comes to compromising your values. So we might sort of somehow try to save people's lives until we have other solutions. But I don't think that what the Taliban are demanding right now is something which is going to last very long. I don't think that itself is a recipe for stability in the country. So we are uncertain about the future of a Taliban government in Afghanistan and how the Afghan people, first of all, and second, powers in the region and beyond will react to it. So I think journalists inside the country and those of us are outside the country are very much committed to giving the Afghan people the voice they need, or giving them the platform for them to express their views. We see that on social media now. I don't think it's really in the hands of one or two particular media outlets to decide how to shape the narrative coming out of Afghanistan. I think the people are connected. 21 million cell phones are distributed in Afghanistan. We have a population of around 35 million people. 3G and 4G internet are around the country, so people are connected. I don't think that they have chosen to stay silent. They are not. We have seen, and you might have seen Afghan women protesting, going to the streets, and demanding for their rights. So if they take that risk to go out and express their views and be so brave, why not the journalists just give them the platform and take a much lesser risk to just echo and amplify their voices and spread the words, basically. So I think it's even impossible even for media to decide were to shut down such platforms and stop giving the Afghan people the voice they need?
I want to squeeze two questions in here. Thank you, Natalie and Latfula. So Mitch, I'm going to ask you for a short answer to a complicated question. Why do you think there's a lack of courage and accountability among our politicians when it comes to addressing our deep structural issues?
You want a short answer to that question?
Xavier, who came in over.
Let me answer that in a very political way. And Tony, I know will support this, even though he and I haven't had the pleasure of spending time together. Most politicians will follow what they think their voters want. And that's just generally true. Same thing is true with pastors, isn't it, Russell? That's where the pressure comes from. There are very few people that will find a way to counteract what they think their constituents want because they're afraid they're going to lose their job. And they make the calculation that kind of given in here will allow them to stick around longer to hopefully do more good. That's how they justify it to themselves. There are some times though, maybe they're rare, maybe they should be less rare, when you got to kind of, put your sticking pole in the ground and say that as a matter of, right and wrong, this is the right thing to do, even if it causes you to lose your job. Oftentimes politicians find out that when they do that, their citizens surprise them. When I was in the legislature, for example, there were a number of different times when I took a position that I knew was contrary to what the majority of my constituents wanted me to do. And I did it because I thought I had more information than them. And at that moment, and I felt like they trusted my judgment, and that if I could explain to them why I did what I did, many of them would say, even though I disagree with you, I respect that you did it the way that you did it. And that actually turned out to be true for me in a number of different instances. And so, finding courage is like building muscle. It's not like living without fear. It's learning how to live with fear and then trying to just be guided by doing the right thing and then practice doing it over and over again, because it takes practice. And then you need people to lean on, because your feral instinct is a good one, which tells you to be afraid. There's a reason why you have that thing, because there is a lot to fear. But I've found over time, and I haven't always done the right thing and I haven't always made courageous decisions, but in the few instances when I was pleasantly surprised by people who disagreed with me said, you know what, that took a lot of guts. And I admire you for doing that, even though I disagree with you. And I like that kind of leadership. So I would encourage people to take risks in your personal life, in your business life, and in your political life too, because you never really know where your constituents are going to be. If you disrespect them, if they act like you have not heard them, as opposed to listening to everything that they do, if you don't give them a chance to tell you what it is that they think, those are all bad. But being on a different side of them on an issue, it doesn't always mean a death sentence. And I think too many politicians misinterpret the cadence of that work over time. And I'll end with this: when you've made as many decisions as I had, and you've made as many mistakes as I have, you come to find out that not every mistake that you make is fatal.
Thanks, Mitch. And Tony, now I'm going to have to ask you to be brief, and Oliver has the last question, and it's for you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Oliver. I'm a second-year undergraduate studying public policy, and this is a very related question for Mr. Fabrizio, which is, how's the issue of electoral legitimacy affecting prospective Republican candidates? So does polling show that support for the claim that Trump won in 2020, is that a necessary claim for anyone who wants to run as a Republican in 2022 to make?
It is interesting that if I told you that the percentage of Republicans today that believe that the election was stolen is greater than it was in January, you would probably think I'm crazy, but it's not. It's true. It is higher today than it was 5, 6, 7 months ago. And a couple of things have occurred that I think have contributed to that. One of them being, particularly in the last month or so, with the several crises that we've seen involving the Biden administration, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's inflation, whether it's the border situation, et cetera, what you have is you have this, if Biden had a sliver with Republicans, that sliver is now gone. He's become as polarized with Republicans as Trump was with Democrats. And it is feeding their belief that this guy is not a legitimate president, rightly or wrongly. And we're not talking about like they think there was a little fraud. We're talking about they think full blown that the election was stolen. And it is going to be very difficult for any Republican to basically say that there were no irregularities. Now, there are a lot of Republicans that walk the line, that say, yes, there was some irregularities, et cetera, but Biden is still the president. But if you're running in a primary today and you're running a competitive primary, that's a tough position to take, a very tough position to take. And it is the fact of what the modern Republican Party is today.
Yeah. Given what you said earlier about your concern about erosion of trust in institutions, that's a really big problem.
That is a major thing. Can I just say one more thing, David? Just very quickly?
Sure, of course.
We're all here and we're talking about all the problems that the country faces and the divisions in our country, et cetera. And I just have to say, while I am impressed by everybody that I am going to be a visiting fellow with, I am particularly impressed with La Fala. And I cannot imagine having a country that went from basically no freedom to having 20 years of freedom and now staring down the barrel of having all of those freedoms taken away. And, while we argue and quibble here, we have never faced something like that. And to me, that is amazing, and it is scary. And I would be scared if I were in his position.
Well, he clearly doesn't scare easily.
No, apparently not.
But let me just say amen to that. And just so excited, and I hope everybody is, who's listened today, so excited to see all of you, and I'm so looking forward to being with all of you. It's going to be a really stimulating time. And each of you are not just someone who can impart important information, but you're an example for those who are interested in following in your footsteps, and that practical experience, not just the other elements that you bring, but that practical experience is really very much a part of this fellows program. And so thank you all for being part of this. Thank you for listening, those who have, and we look forward to seeing you on campus in the days to come.